believe you want more money, more opportunities, more influence, more freedom. But what you actually want is something far more primitive, far more chemical, far more dangerous to admit. You want the feeling that comes with those things. You want the neurological reward, the dopamine hit, the sensation of progress, of achievement, of mastery. And here's the problem that no one told you. Your brain has been hijacked, systematically, deliberately, by forces that understand your neurology better than you do. Every application on your phone, every streaming service, every social media platform, they've turned your ancient survival system against you. And in doing so, they've made discipline feel like torture and distraction feel like relief. But this is not a video about quitting your phone or deleting social media or moving to a cabin in the woods. This is about something far more strategic. This is about understanding the exact mechanism by which your brain assigns value to activities, and then using that mechanism to rewire yourself so that the difficult things, the valuable things, not through willpower, not through motivation, but through neuroplasticity, through the deliberate recalibration of your dopamine system. What I'm about to show you is how to make your brain enjoy discipline, how to transform work into reward, how to make the hard path feel easier than the easy path. This is not philosophy. This is practical neuroscience applied to the single most important question you'll ever answer. How do I make myself capable of doing what needs to be done? Let's start with something your brain does every second of every day without your conscious awareness. It runs a cost-benefit analysis on everything. Should I get up from this chair? Should I have this conversation? Should I start this project? Should I eat this meal? Your brain is not interested in your dreams. It's interested in survival. And survival, from an evolutionary perspective, means conserving energy. Because for most of human history, food was scarce, energy was precious. Wasting energy on unnecessary activities could mean death. So your brain developed a sophisticated system to evaluate every potential action based on one simple question. What's the expected reward and what's the energy cost? If the reward is high and the cost is low, your brain floods you with motivation. You feel pulled toward the activity. If the reward is low and the cost is high, your brain floods you with resistance. You feel pushed away from the activity. This is not a bug. This is the most fundamental feature of your operating system. And here's what makes this dangerous in the modern world. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a real reward and an artificial one. It cannot tell the difference between the dopamine hit you get from accomplishing something meaningful and to your brain, dopamine is dopamine, reward is reward. And this is where the hijacking begins. Every major technology company employs teams of neuroscientists, behavioral psychologists, which is a polite way of saying their job is to trigger your dopamine system as frequently and as intensely as they've discovered that uncertainty drives dopamine more than certainty. That's why slot machines are addictive. That's why you can't stop refreshing your feed. You never know what you're going to see next. They've discovered that social validation triggers massive dopamine spikes. That's why notifications are designed to be unpredictable. That's why likes and comments and shares exist. They've discovered that novelty triggers dopamine even without any real reward. That's why platforms are designed to give you an endless stream of new content, new faces, new information, new stimulation. They're not trying to make you happy, they're trying to make you come back. And the mechanism they're exploiting is the same mechanism that's supposed to make you pursue real. Your brain's dopamine system was designed to make you hunt, to make you explore, to make you build, to make you solve problems, to make you create value in the world so that you could survive and reproduce. But now that system is being triggered 1,000 times a day by things that require no effort, no skill, no growth, no real value creation. And this creates a catastrophic problem. Here's what most people don't understand about dopamine. It is not the molecule of pleasure. It is the molecule of wanting, of anticipation, of seeking. When you see a notification, dopamine spikes before you check it. That's the anticipation. When you open the app, you might feel a brief moment of satisfaction, but that's not dopamine, that's opioids. Endorphins, different system. What keeps you coming back is not the reward itself. It's the anticipation of the reward. This is why you can scroll for hours and feel empty afterward. You are chasing a feeling that the activity itself cannot deliver. You are pursuing the anticipation, not the fulfillment. And here's where it gets worse. Your brain adapts. When you flood your dopamine system with constant, easy stimulation, it reduces the number of dopamine receptors. Think of it like this. If you live next to a highway, eventually you stop hearing the traffic. Your auditory system adapts. It becomes less sensitive to constant noise. Your dopamine system does the same thing. If you're constantly triggering it with easy artificial rewards, it becomes less sensitive to dopamine, which means the same activity that used to excite you now feels boring. You need more stimulation to feel the same reward. This is tolerance. This is why people scroll faster over time, why they need more extreme content, why nothing feels satisfying anymore. But here's the real damage. When your dopamine system is downregulated, everything feels boring. Not just the artificial stuff, the real stuff too. Reading a book, too slow, working on a project, too hard, going to the gym, no immediate payoff. Having a meaningful conversation, not stimulating enough. Your brain has been recalibrated to expect constant, effortless, intense stimulation. And anything that doesn't provide that feels like torture. This is why discipline feels impossible. It's not a character flaw, it's not laziness, it's neurological. Your reward system has been chemically altered to prioritize short-term artificial stimulation over long-term. And this brings us to the concept that can reverse all of it, the dopamine detox. The term is slightly misleading. You're not actually detoxing dopamine from your brain. What you're doing is removing the artificial sources of overstimulation so that your dopamine receptors can become sensitive again, so that normal activities start to feel rewarding again. The protocol is simple in theory. You remove all supernormal stimuli for a period of time. No phone, no internet, no social media, no streaming, no video games, no junk food, no artificial dopamine triggers. For one day, for 1 week, for whatever period you can sustain. And in that absence, you allow your brain to recalibrate. You allow your dopamine receptors to increase in number and sensitivity. You reset your baseline. But here's what no one tells you about this process. The first few days are brutal. Not because you're physically addicted, but because your brain is experiencing a reward deficit. You've removed all the easy sources of dopamine and your brain hasn't yet adapted. So you feel restless, anxious, irritable, bored to the point of pain. This is not failure. This is the process. This is your brain reorganizing itself. This is the withdrawal phase. And if you can endure it, something remarkable happens. After a few days, maybe a week, activities that used to feel boring start to feel interesting. Reading becomes engaging. Exercise becomes enjoyable. Conversation becomes stimulating. Work becomes rewarding. Why? Because your dopamine receptors have upregulated. Your brain is now sensitive to smaller, slower, more natural rewards. The things that used to feel like discipline now feel like relief. This is the entire game. You're not trying to develop willpower. You're trying to recalibrate your reward system so that the valuable activities become the rewarding. But here's the critical mistake people make. They remove the bad habits without replacing them. They do the detox, they feel the boredom, and then they relapse because they haven't filled the void. You must replace the artificial stimulation with real activity, not as punishment, as substitution. When you feel the urge to scroll, you read. When you feel the urge to watch, you create. When you feel the urge to consume, you build. This is not about discipline, this is about redirection. You're not fighting your dopamine system. You're retraining it. And over time, the new activities become the rewarding activities. Your brain starts to associate effort with reward, difficulty with satisfaction, creation with fulfillment. This is neuroplasticity in action. Your brain physically changes based on what you do repeatedly. And once this shift happens, discipline stops feeling like sacrifice, it starts feeling like identity. Now let's talk about the distinction that changes everything. Pleasure versus satisfaction. Pleasure is immediate. It's intense, it's short-lived, it requires no effort, and it leaves no residue. Satisfaction is delayed. It's subtle, it's enduring, it requires significant effort, and it builds your sense of self. When you scroll, you get pleasure. When you finish a book, you get satisfaction. When you eat junk food, you get pleasure. When you cook a healthy meal, you get satisfaction. When you watch someone else create, you get pleasure. When you create something yourself, you get satisfaction. Pleasure activates the limbic system, the primitive emotional brain. Satisfaction activates the prefrontal cortex, the executive function brain. The part that makes you human, the part that can delay gratification, set long-term goals, resist impulses. Here's the problem. The modern world has been optimized for pleasure, because pleasure sells. Pleasure is immediate, pleasure is easy, but pleasure does not build you, satisfaction builds you. And satisfaction requires suffering, not suffering in the sense of misery, suffering in the sense of effort, of difficulty, of delayed gratification, of doing something hard now for a reward that comes later. This is the trade. You trade pleasure for satisfaction, and in doing so, you trade a weak self for a strong self. And this brings us to one of the most powerful tools you have: environment design. You cannot rely on willpower. Willpower is a finite resource. It depletes throughout the day. It's weakest when you're tired, stressed, or hungry. If you're relying on willpower to resist your phone, you will fail. Not sometimes, eventually. What you must do instead is design your environment to make the bad behavior hard and the good behavior easy. You want to stop scrolling. Remove the apps from your phone. You want to stop binge watching. Cancel the subscriptions. You want to stop eating junk food. Don't buy it. Don't keep it in your house. You want to read more. Put the book on your pillow. You want to exercise. Put your workout clothes next to your bed. This is not laziness. This is strategy. You're removing friction from the behaviors you want and adding friction to the behaviors you don't want. You're hacking your own defaults, because the truth is most of your behavior is automatic. You're not consciously deciding to scroll. You're responding to environmental cues. Your phone is on the table. You pick it up, you see the app, you open it, you scroll. None of that required a decision. It was all automatic. So if you want to change your behavior, you don't change your decisions. You change your environment so that the automatic behavior is the behavior you want. And here's the realization that no one wants to hear. Freedom is not the ability to follow your impulses. Freedom is the ability to choose your actions independent of your impulses. If you can only do what feels good in the moment, you're not free. You're a slave to your neurochemistry. Real freedom is having a brain that's capable of doing difficult things. A brain that finds reward in effort. A brain that can delay gratification. A brain that can execute on long-term plans. This is what the dopamine detox gives you, not the absence of pleasure, but the presence of agency. The ability to choose what you do based on what you value, not based on what feels easy. And once you have that, everything changes. Your career changes because you can do the hard work that creates real value. Your relationships change because you can invest time and attention without needing constant stimulation. Your health changes because you can make decisions based on long-term outcomes, not short-term cravings. Your mind changes because you can think deeply without needing constant distraction. This is not about becoming a monk. This is about becoming dangerous, about becoming someone who can outwork, outthink, and outlast everyone who's still enslaved to their dopamine. But rewiring your dopamine system is only half of the equation. The other half is rewiring how you think about your own capability. And this is where most people fail before they even start, because they operate from what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a fixed mindset. They believe that their intelligence, their talent, their discipline, their worth are fixed traits. You either have them or you don't, and this belief is a silent killer. When you believe your abilities are fixed, failure becomes a verdict on who you are. If you fail at something, it means you're not capable, and if you're not capable, why try? This is why people quit after the first obstacle, not because they lack discipline, but because they've interpreted the obstacle as evidence of their inadequacy. But here's the truth that changes everything. Your brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity is not a metaphor, it's a biological fact. Your brain physically changes in response to what you do. When you practice something, your brain builds new neural pathways. When you struggle with something, your brain strengthens the connections needed to solve it. When you fail and then try again, your brain adapts. This is not motivational speaking, this is neuroscience. And it means that your abilities are not fixed. They're malleable, they grow with effort. And this shift in perspective, from fixed to growth, is the difference between people who transform their... Here's a simple linguistic tool that rewires your brain in real time. Add the word yet to every limitation you declare. I don't know how to do this yet, I'm not good at this yet. I can't make this work yet. This single word changes the statement from a fixed identity to a temporary state. It implies that change is possible, that growth is expected, that failure is just a current location, not a permanent destination. And your brain responds to this. When you say I can't, your brain stops looking for solutions. When you say I can't yet, your brain starts looking for pathways. This is not positive thinking. This is cognitive reframing. You're changing the question your brain is trying to answer. From can I do this to how can I learn to do this? And that shift activates different neural networks. The fixed mindset activates threat responses. The growth mindset activates learning responses. One shuts you down, the other opens you up. Now let's talk about failure. Because your relationship with failure determines your trajectory more than your relationship with success. People with a fixed mindset see failure as a reflection of who they are. People with a growth mindset see failure as information about what needs to change. This distinction is everything. When you fail at something, and you interpret it as a character flaw, you avoid that thing in the future. You protect your ego by not trying. When you fail at something and you interpret it as a data point, you adjust your approach and try again. You protect your growth by not quitting. Here's the brutal truth. You will fail more than you succeed, especially when you're learning something new, especially when you're attempting something difficult, especially when you're creating value in a domain where you don't yet have mastery. And if every failure feels like a personal indictment, you will quit. Not because you lack ability, but because you lack the psychological framework to metabolize failure productively. So you must reframe it. Failure is not a verdict. It's a diagnosis. It tells you what's not working. It points you toward what needs to improve. It gives you information, and information is the most valuable resource you have when you're trying to grow. And this brings us to something uncomfortable. Growth requires discomfort, not optional discomfort, mandatory discomfort. You cannot grow inside your comfort zone. By definition, your comfort zone is the set of activities you're already competent at. If you want to become competent at new things, you must leave that zone. And when you leave that zone, you feel incompetent. You feel awkward, you feel slow, you feel stupid. This is not a sign that you're in the wrong place. This is a sign that you're in the right place. Discomfort is the sensation of growth. It's your brain building new neural pathways. It's your mind expanding its capacity. And if you can learn to interpret that discomfort, not as a problem but as a signal, everything changes. Most people flee discomfort. They retreat back to what's familiar. They choose comfort over growth. And then they wonder why their lives don't change. But you're not most people. You understand that the discomfort is the price of transformation, and you're willing to pay it. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because you understand that temporary suffering leads to permanent expansion. Let me give you something that will separate you from everyone else. The ability to metabolize criticism. Most people cannot handle criticism, even constructive criticism, even criticism that's accurate and helpful, because they interpret it through a fixed mindset. They hear you're doing this wrong and they translate it to you are wrong. Their identity feels threatened. Their ego activates, and they become defensive. But here's what people with a growth mindset do. They extract the useful information from the criticism and discard the emotional noise. They ask themselves, is there truth in this? Is there something I can learn from this? Is there a way I can use this to improve? They don't take it personally, because they don't see their current performance as their permanent identity. This is a superpower, because most people avoid giving honest feedback. They're afraid of offending you. They're afraid of conflict. So they tell you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. But if you can signal that you welcome criticism, that you actively seek it, and the truth is the fastest path to improvement. So here's the practice. When someone criticizes you, pause. Do not defend. Do not explain. Just say thank you for the feedback. Let me think about that. And then actually think about it. Not to decide if they're right or wrong, but to decide if there's anything useful in what they said. This one practice will accelerate your growth more than almost anything else, because you'll have access to information that most people never get. But here's the trap that kills more potential than anything else: perfectionism. The belief that if you can't do it perfectly, you shouldn't do it at all. This sounds like high standards. It's actually self-sabotage, because perfectionism is not about excellence, it's about fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of being seen as inadequate, so you don't start. Or you start and then you quit because it's not perfect. Or you finish but you never share it because it's not perfect. And meanwhile, people with lower standards and higher output are building skills, getting feedback, iterating. Here's the truth. Your first attempt at anything will be bad. Your second attempt will be slightly less bad. Your 10th attempt will be mediocre. Your 100th attempt will be good. And your 1000th attempt will be excellent. But you only get to attempt 1000 if you're willing to tolerate attempts 1 through 900. So you must reframe the goal. The goal is not to do it perfectly. The goal is to do it repeatedly. The goal is not to avoid mistakes. The goal is to make mistakes faster so you can learn faster. The goal is not to protect your ego. The goal is to build your skill And skill only comes from repetition, from volume, from doing the thing over and over, even when it's not perfect, especially when it's not perfect. And this is why you must focus on process, not just results. Results are lagging indicators. They tell you what happened in the past based on what you did in the past. Process is a leading indicator. It tells you what's going to happen in the future based on what you're doing now. If you only celebrate results, you only feel good when you win. And winning is unpredictable. You can do everything right and still lose because of factors outside your control. But if you celebrate process, you feel good every time you show up, every time you do the work, every time you execute your system, and that creates sustainable motivation because you're not dependent on external validation. You're generating internal validation based on your own behavior. Here's the practice. At the end of every day, ask yourself, did I execute my process today? Not did I get the result I wanted? Did I do what I said I would do? If yes, that's a win, regardless of the outcome. This is how you build discipline that lasts, because you're training your brain to reward effort, not just results. And effort is the only thing you control. Now here's where I need you to do something, not later, right now. I need you to make a public commitment, because private intentions are weak. They're easy to abandon. They're easy to rationalize away. But public commitments are strong. They create social accountability. They activate your identity. They make it harder to quit because quitting now has a social cost. So here's what I want you to do. Go to the comments right now and type this exact phrase. I am reclaiming my attention. I am rebuilding my discipline. I am becoming dangerous. And then hit like on this video. And subscribe to this channel, not because I need your engagement, but because you need to mark this moment. You need to signal to yourself that this is not just information. This is transformation. You need to declare publicly that you're choosing a different path, because that declaration changes something inside you. It activates commitment. It strengthens resolve. It makes the internal decision external. And once it's external, it's real, so do it now. Comment, like, subscribe. This is not about me. This is about you drawing a line in your own life and saying, everything changes from this point forward. Let's take a moment and recognize what we've covered so far. You now understand that your brain operates on a cost-benefit analysis every second of every day. You understand that your dopamine system has been hijacked by artificial stimulation, designed to maximize. You understand that dopamine is not pleasure, it's anticipation. You understand that the dopamine detox is not about deprivation, but about recalibration, about resetting your reward system so that effort becomes rewarding. You understand that you must replace bad habits with good habits, not just remove them. You understand the difference between pleasure and satisfaction. You understand that environment design is more powerful than willpower. You understand that real freedom is not following your impulses but having the agency to act according to your. You understand the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. You understand that failure is not a verdict, but a diagnosis, and that discomfort is the sensation of growth. You understand that criticism is information, that perfectionism is self-sabotage. This is already more than most people will ever understand about how their own minds work. But we're not done, because what comes next is where the real transformation happens. What comes next is reserved for people who are ready to think differently, to see differently, to act differently. What comes next is not for everyone. It's for the few who understand that the world rewards people who create value in places where others see none. Who understand that leverage is the difference between working hard and getting nowhere, and working smart, and who understand that the game is not about effort, it's about impact. And impact comes from understanding principles that most people will never learn because they're too busy. Here's the first principle that changes everything. The world does not reward effort. It rewards value creation. You can work 100 hours a week and make nothing if you're creating nothing of value. Or you can work 10 hours a week and make a fortune if you're creating something people desperately want. This sounds obvious, but most people live as though effort equals reward. They believe that if they just work hard enough, they'll be successful. This is not true. Hard work is necessary, but it's not sufficient. What matters is whether the work you're doing creates value for someone else. Because value is the only currency that matters. Money is just a representation of value. Influence is just a representation of value. Opportunity is just a representation of value. If you create real value, everything else follows. If you don't, nothing else matters. So the question is not, am I working hard? The question is, am I creating value? And if the answer is no, you need to change what you're working on, not how hard you're working. Here's the second principle. Value is not subjective, it's contextual. People believe that value is in the eye of the beholder, that one person's trash is another person's treasure. This is partially true, but it misses the deeper pattern. Value is created when you solve a problem for someone. The bigger the problem, the more valuable the solution. The more people who have the problem, the more scalable the value. The harder the problem is to solve, the more defensible the value. This is not philosophy, this is economics. A glass of water has little value if you're standing next to a river. It has infinite value if you're dying of thirst in a desert. The water didn't change, the context changed. So if you want to create value, you must understand context, you must understand what problems people have, what pain they're experiencing, what obstacles they're facing, what desires they're pursuing. And then you must position yourself as the solution. This is true in business. This is true in relationships. This is true in content creation. This is true in every domain of life. If you can solve problems that other people can't or won't solve, you become irreplaceable. And irreplaceable people get disproportionate rewards. Here's the third principle. Attention is the most valuable resource in the modern economy. Not money, not time, attention. Because attention is the precursor to everything else. If you can capture someone's attention, you can influence their thoughts. If you can influence their thoughts, you can influence their decisions. If you can influence their decisions, you can influence their behavior. And behavior is what creates outcomes. This is why every major company is fighting for your attention. This is why social media platforms are free, because your attention is worth more than your money. They monetize your attention by selling it to advertisers. But here's the game that almost no one is playing. If attention is the most valuable resource, the people who control attention control everything. So the question is not how do I get more money? The question is how do I capture and direct attention? And the answer is through value creation. If you create something valuable, attention flows to you. If you create something remarkable, attention compounds. If you create something that solves a real problem in a way that's better than existing solutions, and once you have attention, you can convert it into anything else you want. Money, influence, opportunity, power. Here's the fourth principle. Leverage is the difference between linear growth and exponential growth. Most people trade time for money. They work an hour, they get paid for an hour. This is linear. There's a cap on how much you can earn because there's a cap on how many hours you can work. But leverage allows you to decouple your input from your output. You create something once and it generates value many times. This is exponential. Code is leverage. Content is leverage. Systems are leverage. People are leverage. If you can build something that works without you, you've created leverage. And leverage is what creates wealth. Not hard work, not long hours, leverage. So the question is not how hard am I working? The question is, am I building leverage? Am I creating assets that generate value independent of my time? Because if you're not, you're on a treadmill. You're working hard to stay in place. And the moment you stop, everything stops. Here's the fifth principle. Positioning determines perceived value. Two people can offer the exact same service. One charges $100, one charges $10,000. The difference is not the service. It's the positioning, how they present themselves, who they target, what story they tell, what transformation they promise. This is not manipulation, this is communication, because value is not inherent, value is perceived. And perception is shaped by context, framing, and narrative. If you position yourself as a commodity, you'll be paid commodity prices. If you position yourself as a specialist, you'll be paid specialist prices. If you position yourself as an authority, you'll be paid authority prices. Same work, different perception, different reward. So the question is not, am I good at what I do? The question is, am I communicating my value effectively? Because if people don't perceive your value, it doesn't matter how much value you actually create. Here's the sixth principle. Speed of implementation beats quality of information. You now have more information than your grandparents had access to in their entire lives. But information is not transformation. Knowing is not doing. And doing is the only thing that matters. The difference between successful people and everyone else is not what they know. It's how fast they act on what they know. Most people consume information endlessly. They watch videos, they read books, they take courses, and they do nothing. They're addicted to learning because learning feels productive. But learning without implementation is just entertainment. So here's the rule. Every time you learn something valuable, you implement it within 24 hours. You don't wait for perfect conditions. You don't wait until you know more. You act immediately. You test. You iterate. You learn from doing, not from consuming. Because the feedback loop from reality is 1,000 times more valuable than the feedback loop from more. Here's the 7th principle. Identity is the deepest form of motivation. You can have goals. You can have plans. You can have discipline. But if your identity is misaligned with your actions, you'll fail. Because your identity is the story you tell yourself about who you are. And you will act in accordance with that story, even when it's self-destructive. If you see yourself as someone who lacks discipline, you'll act without discipline. If you see yourself as someone who quits, you'll quit. If you see yourself as someone who's not capable, you'll avoid challenge. But if you see yourself as someone who does hard things, you'll do hard things. If you see yourself as someone who finishes what they start, you'll finish. If you see yourself as someone who creates value, you'll create value. This is why the comment you made earlier matters. You declared publicly, I am reclaiming my attention. I am rebuilding my discipline. I am becoming dangerous. That declaration was not about me. It was about you claiming a new identity. And once you claim an identity, you start to act in alignment with it, not because you're forcing yourself, but because that's who you are now. So the question is not, what do I want to do? The question is, who do I want to become? And then you act like that person would act every single day, until it's no longer an act, until it's just who you are. Here's what most people will never understand. Discipline is not about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. That's willpower. And willpower runs out. Discipline is about building a system where the right actions become automatic, where your environment, your identity, your dopamine system, and once that system is in place, discipline doesn't feel like sacrifice, it feels like inevitability. You're not fighting yourself. You're cooperating with yourself. Your brain wants what you want. Your environment supports what you want. Your identity reflects what you want. And the actions that used to require massive effort now require almost none. This is mastery. Not over external circumstances, over yourself. And once you've mastered yourself, everything else becomes accessible. Because the bottleneck is never the world. The bottleneck is always you, your attention, your discipline, your ability to delay gratification, your ability to do hard things, your ability to create value consistently over time. And if you can fix the bottleneck, everything flows. So here's what you do now. You start immediately. Not tomorrow, not Monday, not next week, now. You choose one supernormal stimulus to remove from your life for the next 7 days. One app, one habit, one distraction, and you remove it completely. And in its place, you choose one valuable activity to do every single day. One activity that builds skill, that creates value, that moves you toward the person you're trying to become, and you do it every day for 7 days. You don't aim for perfection, you aim for consistency. Because consistency is what rewires your brain. And after 7 days you assess, you notice what changed, how you feel, what's easier, what's harder. And then you iterate, you add another change, you remove another distraction, you build another habit. You're not trying to transform overnight. You're trying to transform over time. One decision at a time, one day at a time, one habit at a time. And the compound effect of those small changes is what creates the life you want. Now I need you to do one more thing. Go back to the comments and tell me what stimulus you're removing and what habit you're adding. Make it public, make it real, make it binding. Because the moment you declare it publicly, you activate accountability. You activate identity. You activate commitment. And that's what makes the difference between people who watch videos about change and people who actually... So do it now. Comment your commitment and then start. Because this video ends, but your transformation begins. And a year from now, you'll look back at this moment as the inflection point. The moment you stopped being a passenger in your own life and became the driver. The moment you stopped consuming your way through life and started creating your way through life. The moment you stopped letting your dopamine system control you and started controlling your dopamine system. This is not motivational speaking. This is practical neuroscience applied to the single most important question you'll ever answer. Who do you want to become? And are you willing to do what it takes to become that person? If the answer is yes, you now have everything you need. The knowledge, the framework, the tools. The understanding. What you do with it is up to you, but understand this. The world is not waiting for you to be ready. Opportunities are not waiting for you to feel confident. Success is not waiting for you to have perfect conditions. The game is happening now. And you're either playing or you're watching, so choose and then act. Because that's the only thing that matters.